Today, we examine 6 rich people who died in very dumb ways. From a millionaire pilot ignoring severe weather warnings to make a dinner meeting, to an entitled millionaire refusing to wait before starting his yacht's engine, which gave him karma in the most brutal way possible. It was February 8, 2020, in a gated community outside Charlotte, North Carolina. Inside a large private residence, a converted guest suite served as a personal wellness room equipped with infrared panels, an IV station, and a steel monoplace hyperbaric oxygen chamber measuring roughly 8 feet long and 4 feet in diameter. Nadine Callier was 46 years old and had built a net worth of approximately $12 million through a chain of medical aesthetics clinics across the Southeast. Friends later described her as deeply invested in her own appearance, often bypassing conventional medical advice in favor of trends circulating within high-end wellness circles. 18 months earlier, Nadine purchased the clinical-grade chamber for roughly $60,000. The therapy involves lying inside a sealed steel tube while it pressurizes and fills with concentrated oxygen, a treatment with legitimate medical applications for wound healing and certain infections. The manufacturer's safety documentation, signed by Nadine at installation, explicitly prohibited electronic devices inside the chamber. In a pressurized, oxygen-rich environment, the ignition threshold for common materials drops dramatically. Even a phone producing a small spark could trigger a flash fire. A technician who serviced the unit twice told investigators he reinforced this warning during both visits. Nadine's personal assistant later stated that Nadine routinely brought her phone inside despite the restriction, and that when the assistant raised the concern, she was dismissed. That Saturday morning, Nadine entered the wellness room shortly after 8. Her assistant was off for the weekend. Her husband had left early for a golf outing. Home security logs showed the chamber's compressor activating at approximately 8:15. The system required several minutes to reach operating pressure, during which oxygen concentration inside the sealed tube climbed steadily. Roughly 25 minutes into the session, neighbors reported hearing a muffled thud from inside the home, followed immediately by smoke alarms. Investigators concluded that the phone's lithium-ion battery experienced a short circuit inside the oxygen-saturated chamber. In normal conditions, such a malfunction might produce brief heat or a small flame. Inside the pressurized environment, the result was immediate ignition. The flash fire consumed available fuel within seconds. Fabric lining, foam padding, plastic fittings, and clothing all ignited in rapid succession, fueled by the concentrated oxygen. The external steel shell contained the fire but trapped the heat and toxic gases inside. Although the chamber included an internal emergency depressurization lever, investigators concluded the fire would have caused incapacitation within seconds, leaving virtually no opportunity to activate it. The chamber's emergency release handle, located on the exterior, could not be operated from inside during a pressurized session. Nadine had virtually no opportunity to react. The neighbor who heard the alarms walked to the front door, received no response, and called emergency services. Fire crews arrived within 9 minutes and found heavy smoke issuing from a first-floor window. Firefighters forced entry and discovered the chamber heavily damaged by internal fire. The lining had melted and charred, and residual heat radiated from the surface. Nadine was found inside with severe thermal injuries. Paramedics found no signs of life, and she was pronounced dead at the scene. The medical examiner determined the cause of death was thermal burns and smoke inhalation sustained within the pressurized oxygen environment. Investigators recovered remnants of a smartphone inside the chamber, and forensic analysis confirmed battery failure as the ignition source. County fire officials classified the death as accidental. The case was later cited in a federal consumer safety bulletin regarding home-use hyperbaric equipment. The chamber was removed, and the home was listed for sale the following year. It was May 22, 2019, at a sprawling ranch property in the hill country west of Austin, Texas, where 600 acres of rolling limestone ridges and cedar thickets stretched under a cloudless afternoon sky. The terrain was rugged, steep draws, loose rock shelves, and narrow dirt tracks winding far from the main house. Brennan Callister was 31 years old and had accumulated significant wealth as co-founder of a logistics software company, selling his stake 2 years earlier in a deal that placed his net worth at roughly $22 million. He purchased the ranch 6 months prior. Friends later described him as restless and constantly chasing intensity, skydiving, mountain biking, backcountry racing, often pushing harder when the original thrill wore off. Shortly after buying the property, Brennan purchased a high-performance side-by-side UTV equipped with a factory roll cage, 4-point harnesses, and a speed governor limiting the vehicle to approximately 45 miles per hour. Within weeks, he had a local mechanic disable the governor and remove the factory door nets. The mechanic later stated he advised against both modifications, but completed the work as directed. According to the mechanic, Brennan returned once after the modification to adjust throttle response further, saying he wanted the vehicle to feel less restricted on open stretches of the property. GPS data later showed several prior rides exceeding the factory speed limit on uneven terrain. That Wednesday afternoon, Brennan headed out alone after lunch. A ranch hand near the property entrance later told investigators he saw Brennan pass at high speed without a helmet, a column of dust trailing behind the vehicle. The dirt track beyond the tree line descended through uneven limestone ledges before curving sharply along a dry creek bed. Recent storms had carved a washout roughly 18 inches deep across the trail, partially concealed by overhanging brush. Based on ground scarring analyzed after the incident, investigators estimated the UTV was traveling between 55 and 60 miles per hour when it reached the eroded section. The right front wheel dropped into the washout. The vehicle pitched sharply to the right, and with no harness engaged and no door nets to contain the occupant, the dynamics shifted immediately. The UTV rolled at least twice based on ground disturbance documented at the scene. Brennan was partially ejected during the first rotation. The roll cage frame came down across his upper body on the second. Investigators found the vehicle resting on its side approximately 30 feet from the trail. Brennan was pinned beneath the roll cage structure, partially outside the vehicle, unresponsive. The ranch hand heard the engine rev erratically, then go silent. After several minutes, he drove toward the back acreage and found the overturned vehicle. He called emergency services immediately. Paramedics arrived roughly 25 minutes later due to the remote location, found no pulse, and pronounced Brennan dead at the scene. The medical examiner determined the cause of death was compressive asphyxia combined with blunt force trauma to the chest and upper torso. The final report cited vehicle modifications, excessive speed, and failure to use available restraints as the primary causes. The ranch was later listed for sale. It was June 13, 2017, when afternoon heat settled over a sprawling estate outside Scottsdale, Arizona. Beneath the custom home, a renovated basement corridor stretched roughly 50 feet, fitted with fluorescent lighting, lane dividers, and paper target mounts. The air conditioning strained against the desert heat, and the smell of gun oil lingered in the enclosed space. Drexel Voss was 58 years old and had built substantial wealth through medical device patents during a career in biomedical engineering. Recently retired, he converted the basement into a private handgun range to practice competitively. Associates later described him as highly intelligent but dismissive of outside expertise, confident he could evaluate technical systems without specialized input. Industry standards for indoor ranges require hardened, angled AR-500 steel bullet traps designed to deflect rounds safely downward into containment material. A ballistic engineer provided specifications for a certified trap system incorporating angled steel and rubber media at a cost exceeding $40,000. Drexel rejected the proposal. Instead, he directed the contractor to install a non-rated steel plate mounted perpendicular to the firing line, backed by sandbag. The consulting engineer issued written warnings that the flat, unhardened plate creates serious ricochet hazards. The installation proceeded as directed. The range had been operational for 3 weeks. That Tuesday afternoon, home camera recordings showed Drexel descending to the basement shortly after 2 carrying a handgun case and ammunition. The system did not record inside the firing lane, but audio captured a steady cadence of gunshots over roughly 20 minutes. The shooting then stopped. During one string of fire, a round struck the perpendicular steel plate at near direct impact. Instead of directing downward, the bullet flattened against the mild steel surface and deflected back toward the firing line. The deformed projectile traveled the length of the lane and struck Drexel in the upper right thigh. The round penetrated deeply enough to sever the femoral artery. Investigators later documented heavy arterial blood loss concentrated near the firing line, with a widening pool extending across the concrete floor. Investigators noted transfer marks along the bench edge and a trail of blood leading away from the firing line, suggesting he moved briefly before collapsing roughly 15 feet from his position. His handgun was later found resting on the bench with the slide locked back. No further shots were recorded. Alone in the basement, with his phone left upstairs, there was no call for assistance. Loss of consciousness would likely have occurred within minutes due to rapid blood loss. His wife returned home around 5 and discovered him unresponsive. Emergency responders arrived within 11 minutes but found no pulse. He was pronounced dead at the scene. The medical examiner determined the cause of death was exsanguination due to a penetrating gunshot wound that severed the femoral artery. Investigators documented a fresh impact mark on the steel plate consistent with the ricochet trajectory. Inspectors later determined the range lacked required permits and did not meet accepted safety standards. Authorities reviewed contractor compliance, and the installation was dismantled before the property was eventually sold. It was October 6, 2016, and thick gray clouds moved quickly across the afternoon sky above a private grass airstrip in rural Virginia. Wind gusts bent the tall grass along the runway as scattered raindrops struck the windshield of a small, single-engine aircraft parked near a metal hangar. Distant thunder rolled across the flat terrain. Kelton Reeve was 52 years old and had built significant wealth through commercial real estate investments throughout the Mid-Atlantic region. He earned his private pilot certificate 3 years earlier and had logged approximately 180 hours of flight time, almost all under clear daytime visual flight rules. Friends later described him as intensely schedule-driven, someone who treated delays as problems to be pushed through rather than reasons to stop, a mindset that often carried over from his high-pressure real estate negotiations into his flying decisions. That afternoon, Kelton flew to the rural airstrip for a property inspection about 90 miles from home. He planned to depart quickly to attend a high-stakes investor dinner tied to an active real estate deal he had organized himself, telling colleagues the meeting could not be moved. By mid-afternoon, convective advisories spread across his route, with lowering ceilings, gusting winds, and worsening visibility reported by other pilots. Around 4, a mechanic warned him the storm line covered most of the flight path and suggested delaying or driving instead. Kelton checked his phone, focused on the meeting schedule, and departed shortly after 4:30. Investigators later stated that choosing ground transport likely would have avoided the deteriorating weather. Shortly after departure, Kelton contacted the nearest approach control facility and requested flight following, a common VFR service providing traffic advisories and basic navigational assistance. Radar data later reviewed by investigators showed the aircraft climbing through a lower layer and leveling off. Outside visual references would have been limited. The cloud layer ahead appeared dense and uniform on weather radar. Approximately 12 minutes into the flight, radar returns indicated minor altitude deviations followed by an irregular descent. Audio recordings captured Kelton advising the controller that he was having difficulty maintaining visual reference to the horizon. His voice was described as tense. The controller instructed him to begin a climb and issued specific headings intended to guide him toward clearer air. Kelton acknowledged the instructions, but subsequent responses became inconsistent, with altitude and heading changes not aligning with the guidance provided. Investigators later concluded that the aircraft had likely entered instrument meteorological conditions where outside visual cues are obscured. Without an instrument rating or extensive training in flying solely by reference to cockpit instruments, pilots can experience spatial disorientation within seconds. Radar data showed the airplane entering a tightening, descending turn. As the aircraft lost altitude, radar returns became intermittent, then stopped entirely at approximately 1,400 feet above ground level. Residents near a wooded area adjacent to a state highway reported hearing the engine at high power, followed seconds later by a heavy impact. Emergency responders staged along the nearby highway and reached the crash site within approximately 25 minutes, hiking through dense trees using coordinates from witnesses and radar data. The aircraft had clipped several treetops before impacting the ground at a steep angle, scattering wreckage across roughly 80 feet. Kelton was found secured in the pilot's seat and pronounced deceased at the scene. The medical examiner determined the cause of death was massive blunt force trauma. Investigators concluded he chose to continue visual flight into instrument meteorological conditions despite multiple warnings and safer alternatives, leading to spatial disorientation and loss of control. The final report categorized the crash as pilot error, with weather contributing. It was July 9, 2020, at a marina outside Fort Lauderdale, where late morning sun reflected off calm water and rows of yachts sat secured to their slips. Near the fuel dock, a 48-foot motor yacht rested against its fenders, its white hull gleaming in the light. Clifton Barr was 48 years old and had built substantial wealth through ownership of a liquor distribution network operating throughout Florida and neighboring states, with a net worth estimated at $26 million. He had purchased the yacht 18 months earlier and used it frequently for entertaining clients and weekend cruises. Marina staff later described him as impatient and dismissive of safety protocols, someone who treated posted procedures as suggestions rather than requirements. That Saturday morning, Clifton had arranged a day cruise with several business associates scheduled to depart around noon. He arrived at the marina shortly after 10 to prepare the vessel and refuel before passengers arrived. The yacht used inboard gasoline engines, which creates significant risk during refueling. Gasoline vapors are heavier than air and collect in the engine compartment and bilge, forming an explosive atmosphere if not ventilated. Standard marine safety procedures require opening hatches during fueling and running bilge blowers for at least 4 minutes afterward to clear fumes before starting the engines. These procedures were posted on signs at the fuel dock, printed in the yacht's operating manual, and required by federal marine safety standards and the marina's policies. The fuel dock attendant was trained to explain the procedures to every customer. Clifton pulled the yacht to the fuel dock around 10:15. The attendant later told investigators that he had greeted Clifton and begun the standard safety briefing, emphasizing the ventilation requirements. According to the attendant's statement, Clifton interrupted and said he was familiar with his boat and didn't need instructions. The attendant pumped approximately 90 gallons of gasoline into the yacht's tanks, a process that took several minutes. During this time, Clifton remained in the cockpit area rather than opening hatches and compartments as required. When fueling was complete, Clifton signed the receipt and immediately began moving toward the helm. The attendant called to him, reminding him that he needed to run the bilge blowers for at least 4 minutes before starting the engines. According to the attendant's testimony, Clifton waved dismissively and said he was already late. The attendant later stated he repeated the warning but did not have the authority to prevent departure. Clifton started the engines within seconds of completing fueling. Multiple witnesses on nearby boats later reported that both engines turned over normally and ran briefly before an explosion erupted from the engine compartment beneath the cockpit. The blast was powerful enough to lift portions of the deck and blow out windows on vessels 2 slips away. Flames engulfed the yacht immediately, and thick black smoke billowed upward. The fuel dock attendant and several boaters nearby grabbed fire extinguishers and attempted to control the fire, but the intensity made approach impossible. Emergency services were called within moments. Fire crews arrived within 6 minutes and deployed foam systems to suppress the gasoline fire. The blaze was brought under control in approximately 12 minutes, though the yacht continued smoldering. Clifton was found in the cockpit area, severely burned and unresponsive. Paramedics transported him to a regional burn center while continuing resuscitation efforts, but he was pronounced dead shortly after arrival. The medical examiner determined death resulted from extensive thermal burns and blast trauma. Investigators concluded gasoline vapors had accumulated in the engine compartment due to inadequate ventilation and were ignited by the engine starter. Security footage confirmed Clifton started the engines immediately after fueling. Nearby boats were damaged, and the incident was later cited in a Coast Guard safety bulletin. It was September 14, 2015, at a private game reserve in the Bushveld region of Zimbabwe, where morning sun climbed above the acacia-dotted landscape and scattered bird calls echoed across the dry terrain. A modified Land Cruiser sat parked in sparse shade, its diesel engine ticking as it cooled. Roughly 200 yards away, fresh tracks pressed into dusty soil led into a dense thicket of thorn scrub and tall grass. Thornton Mays was 62 years old and had spent 4 decades in investment banking, rising to senior managing director at a firm specializing in corporate mergers. His net worth was estimated at $44 million. He had traveled to Zimbabwe for a 2-week trophy hunting safari, his 3rd trip to Africa to pursue dangerous game. Professional hunters who had guided him previously described him as a poor marksman who resisted instruction and became defensive when his shooting was critiqued. The reserve's professional hunter, a Zimbabwean national with 23 years of experience, had located a mature Cape buffalo bull that morning. Cape buffalo are widely regarded as among Africa's most dangerous animals, particularly when wounded. A buffalo that survives the first shot will often circle and wait in heavy cover to ambush pursuers. The professional hunter positioned Thornton approximately 120 yards from the bull, which stood broadside in light cover. Standard practice required precise placement in the heart-lung region to ensure rapid incapacitation. Thornton fired once. The buffalo jolted at impact but remained on its feet, then wheeled and crashed into thick brush. Blood sign indicated a hit, but not a lethal one. After examining the spoor, the professional hunter concluded the bullet had struck behind the shoulder, consistent with an abdominal or liver hit. He advised waiting at least 2 hours before following, a common protocol for gut-shot, dangerous game. According to his later statement, Thornton rejected the recommendation and insisted on immediate pursuit. The professional hunter warned that entering dense cover after a wounded buffalo carried significant risk. Thornton moved toward the thicket with his rifle. The professional hunter followed, attempting to take the lead position. Inside the brush, visibility dropped to less than 10 feet. As they tracked the blood trail, brush broke sharply to their right. The buffalo charged from roughly 25 feet away. The animal covered the distance in seconds. Thornton attempted to shoulder his rifle but did not fire before impact. The bull struck him, goring his upper torso and knocking him to the ground before trampling him. The professional hunter discharged 3 rapid shots from a large caliber stopping rifle at close range. The buffalo continued several yards before collapsing. Thornton sustained a penetrating horn injury to the upper torso and severe blunt force trauma from impact and trampling. He was unconscious and breathing shallowly. The professional hunter radioed for helicopter evacuation and attempted to control visible bleeding while providing GPS coordinates. The helicopter arrived just over an hour later. Thornton was airlifted to a regional hospital, but lost vital signs during transport and was pronounced dead upon arrival. A government pathologist determined the cause of death to be massive internal hemorrhage resulting from penetrating torso trauma and associated blunt force injuries. Authorities reviewed the circumstances and concluded the fatality followed the client's decision to pursue a wounded, dangerous animal against professional advice. No criminal charges were filed. The reserve later formalized stricter protocols requiring clients to follow professional guidance during dangerous game follow-ups. Thornton's remains were repatriated to the United States after completion of the inquiry. Thanks for watching. If you liked these stories, click here.